If you've ever been made to feel small in a room where you once belonged, this is the part where you lean in. Hi, my name is Margaret Maggie Callahan, and I'm 68 years old. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman posting something like this, but here we are. I'm writing this the same way my hands were shaking when I held the microphone that day, slow at first, then steadier, then with a kind of clarity that only comes when you finally stop protecting people who never protected you. I'm going to tell you what happened at my son's wedding, and I'm going to tell you why the folding chair mattered. I'll start with the chair. It was beige, metal legs, one of those lightweight folding chairs you see at church basements and backyard barbecues, the kind you bring out when you don't quite have enough real seats or when someone isn't meant to stay long. They had lined the venue with white resin chairs, neat little rows tied with soft blue ribbons. They looked sturdy, intentional, permanent. Mine was not like the others. Mine was off to the side. I remember standing there, purse clutched too tight under my arm, scanning the rows like maybe there'd been a mistake. Maybe my name card had fallen. Maybe someone would notice and wave me over. I even smiled at a bridesmaid, that reflexive, polite smile women my age perfect out of habit. She didn't smile back. She looked past me actually, like I was part of the decor. That's when one of the groomsmen, barely shaving, couldn't have been older than 25, cleared his throat and said, Ma'am, I think this is yours." He gestured to the folding chair. Not even an apology, just logistics. I felt something in my chest then. Not anger. Not yet. It was more like confirmation, like a quiet voice saying, "Oh, so this is how it's going to be." I sat down. The chair wobbled. I adjusted my weight, crossed my ankles, smoothed my dress. Navy blue. I'd agonized over that dress. Didn't want to look too funereal. Didn't want to outshine anyone. Didn't want to give them anything else to whisper about. God, I'd spent years trying not to give them reasons. The venue was one of those restored barns that people like to call rustic chic. Twinkle lights, whitewashed wood, big open doors letting in late summer air. It smelled like hay and peonies and money. Lots of money. Not mine. Definitely not mine. My son, was at the front, laughing with his best man. He looked handsome. Older than I remembered. Taller, somehow. When did that happen? When did the boy who used to sleep with one sock on and one sock off become a man who didn't even look in my direction? I watched him the way mothers do when they're not sure they're allowed to watch anymore. He didn't look back. People around me murmured. Programs rustled. Someone behind me whispered, "Is that?" I didn't turn around. I already knew what they were asking. Is that his mother? Because if I were really his mother, the kind you see in photos and speeches and front row seats, I wouldn't be sitting on a folding chair like an afterthought. But let me rewind, because this didn't start with a chair. It started years ago. It always does. I raised my son, Daniel, mostly on my own. His father left when Danny was 4. No dramatic fight, no final slam of the door. Just a slow fading out, like a radio station losing signal. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't, and then suddenly I was explaining to a little boy why Daddy couldn't come to his school play. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I learned how to stretch ground beef and patience. I learned how to cry quietly in the shower so he wouldn't hear. I learned how to smile at teachers who assumed things and neighbors who pitied me just a little too loudly. Daniel was my purpose. Everything I did with him in mind. I didn't date much. When I did, it never stuck. Men don't love being second place, and a single mother doesn't have the luxury of pretending anyone comes first but her child. I thought, naively maybe, that meant something. When Daniel met Lydia, I wanted to like her. I really did. She was polished, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who brings a bottle of wine even if you tell her not to, the kind who says, Mrs. Callahan, instead of Maggie, even after you insist. At first, I thought it was respect. Later, I realized it was distance. She corrected me gently when I told stories. Oh, Daniel doesn't really like that anymore. She'd smile while she said it, like she was doing me a favor. She'd reorganize my kitchen when she visited. She'd offer to help with things I'd been doing just fine for decades. Daniel started calling less. When he did call, it was on speaker. Lydia always nearby, always listening. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself this is what it looks like when your child grows up and builds a life. I told myself to be grateful he was happy. I didn't tell myself the truth until it was too loud to ignore. The wedding invitation came in the mail. Thick cardstock, cream-colored envelope, beautiful calligraphy. No +1. No mention of mother of the groom. Just my name, misspelled. Margaret. I laughed when I saw it. A short, surprised sound, like my body didn't know whether to be amused or hurt. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I texted, got the invitation. Looks lovely. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Yeah, Lydia handled those. She was stressed. You know how weddings are. I stared at my phone for a long time. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask why I wasn't involved, why I hadn't been asked about the guest list, or the colors, or anything at all. I wanted to ask when I'd stopped being important. Instead, I typed, "Of course, I'm excited for you." That's what I'd been doing for years, swallowing questions, smiling through it, being understanding. I didn't realize how tired I was of understanding. Back to the wedding. The music started. Everyone stood. I stood too, though my chair scraped loudly on the floor, drawing a few looks. The bride came down the aisle, radiant, her parents beaming in the front row. Front row. Where I wasn't. I watched Daniel's face change when he saw her. I saw the way his shoulders straightened, the way his smile softened. I felt proud and invisible at the same time, which is a strange combination, let me tell you. When the officiant asked who gives this woman away, her father spoke. His voice was steady, confident, like he belonged there. I wondered, briefly, if anyone would ever ask who raised the groom. The ceremony passed in a blur. Words about love and commitment floated past me, echoing oddly against the quiet ache in my chest. When they kissed, everyone clapped. I clapped too, harder than most. I meant it. I really did. At the reception, there were place cards. Mine was at a table near the back, next to a teenage cousin I barely knew, and an empty chair that stayed empty all night. The head table was elevated. Candles, flowers, laughter. I watched Lydia lean into Daniel, whisper something that made him laugh. I watched him nod along as her mother spoke animatedly, hands flying, owning the space like she always had. No one came to check on me. Not once. I ate my chicken. It was dry. I didn't complain. I drank my wine slowly, feeling the warmth spread, loosening something inside me. Then came the speeches. Best man first. Funny stories. Applause. Maid of honor next. Inside jokes. Tears. Then Lydia's father stood up. He talked about welcoming Daniel into their family, about how proud he was to call him a son. People clapped. Loudly. I felt something crack. When he sat down, the room buzzed. Glasses clinked. Someone called out, "Who's next?" The DJ looked at his list, confused. He tapped the microphone. We don't have." I stood up. My folding chair screeched again. Every head turned. Daniel looked at me then, really looked. His smile faltered. His eyes widened just a fraction. I walked toward the microphone, slowly, calmly. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I took the mic from the DJ. He didn't stop me. No one did. I looked out at the room, at the lights, at the faces, at my son. I smiled. "Hi," I said, I'm Maggie. I'm Daniel's mother." The room went very quiet. And that's where I'll stop for now, because what I said next is its own reckoning. You could have heard a napkin drop. That's not an exaggeration. I know people say that, but this was different. The silence had weight to it, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether I was about to embarrass myself or everyone else. I felt Daniel's eyes on me. I didn't look at him yet. If I did, I knew I'd soften. I always did. That was my problem. Mothers are trained, by instinct and guilt, to swallow their own hurt if it means sparing their children discomfort. But something in me had shifted when that folding chair scraped the floor for the second time. I cleared my throat. I wasn't on the list to speak. I continued, keeping my voice light, almost amused. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. So forgive me if this comes as a surprise. I paused, let the moment stretch. "I'm 68 years old," I said, "and I've learned that when you get to my age, you stop worrying so much about being convenient." Someone laughed softly. I saw Lydia's mother stiffen, her smile frozen too wide, like porcelain about to crack. "I won't take long," I said. "I promise." That was the first lie I told that night. I finally looked at Daniel. He was pale. His jaw was tight. Not angry. No, not yet. Afraid. Like a man who realizes the version of the story he's been telling might not be the only one in the room. "I'm very proud of my son," I said, and I meant it. My voice caught just slightly, the way it does when truth sneaks up on you. I've watched him grow from a little boy who needed help tying his shoes into a man standing here today, starting his own family. I let my eyes drift to Lydia. She met my gaze briefly, then looked away. I raised Daniel on my own. I went on, not because I'm special, not because I'm stronger than anyone else, but because sometimes life doesn't give you a choice, and you do what needs to be done. There were nods now, quiet ones, people shifting in their seats. I worked long hours. I missed things I wish I hadn't. I made mistakes. I smiled softly. "Ask Daniel. He'll tell you." A few people laughed. Even Daniel did, a reflex, before he caught himself. But every decision I made, I said, was with him in mind. I took a breath. And as parents, we don't raise our children expecting repayment. We don't do it for credit or recognition. I paused again, longer this time, but we do hope, maybe foolishly, that when the big moments come, there's room for us in the picture. You could feel it then, the shift, the discomfort creeping in, the realization that this wasn't just a sweet mother of the groom toast. "I wasn't asked to help plan this wedding," I said calmly. "I didn't help pick the venue, or the colors, or the guest list." I glanced down briefly, then back up. I was grateful to be invited. That line landed harder than I expected. A few people exchanged looks. Someone in the back cleared their throat. And when I arrived today, I continued, I learned exactly where I fit. I didn't gesture. I didn't need to. Half the room had seen the folding chair. "I want to be very clear," I said. "This isn't about furniture." A ripple of uneasy laughter. "It's about what that chair represents." Daniel shifted in his seat. Lydia whispered something to him. He shook his head slightly, eyes never leaving me. "I've spent the last few years trying not to be in the way," I said, "trying to respect boundaries I didn't create, trying to understand changes that were never explained to me." I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't stop. "And tonight, sitting there on the side," I said, "I realized something." I smiled again, and this time it wasn't gentle. I realized I'd been doing that work alone. The room was dead silent now. "I don't blame anyone," I said. "Not really. It's easy to rewrite history when it suits us. It's easy to pretend the past is tidy when it's inconvenient." I looked directly at Lydia's parents. "You welcomed my son into your family tonight," I said, "and I'm grateful for that, truly." Her father nodded stiffly. "But I do want to remind everyone," I added, "that he came from somewhere first." Daniel stood up. Mom, he said, his voice low, urgent. You don't have to. I held up a hand. Sit down, I said softly. He did. That was when I knew something irreversible had already happened. I love you, Daniel, I said, my voice breaking at last. That has never changed. It won't change because of this. I swallowed. But love doesn't mean silence, and it doesn't mean making yourself smaller so others don't feel uncomfortable. I placed the microphone back in its stand. I wish you both a beautiful life, I said. I truly do. Then I stepped back. For a second, no one moved. No clapping, no music, just shock. Then someone started applauding. One person, then another. Not thunderous, not polite, something else, something real. I walked back to my table, my legs trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. I sat down on the folding chair. It didn't wobble this time. I didn't stay much longer after that. I hugged Daniel before I left. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. Lydia watched us like she was afraid I might say more. I didn't need to. The next morning, my phone exploded. Texts, missed calls, messages from relatives who suddenly remembered my number. Some said I was brave. Some said I was cruel. One aunt told me I'd ruined a beautiful day. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. If telling the truth ruins the picture was already cracked. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Because the speech didn't just change how people saw me. It changed what I was finally willing to see. And what came next was not an accident. I thought the fallout would be loud. That's what everyone warns you about when you finally stop being quiet. They tell you to brace yourself for shouting matches, slammed doors, traumatic confrontations. I was ready for that. I'd lived long enough to know how to survive noise. What I wasn't prepared for was the silence, the kind that settles in slowly, the kind that pretends nothing happened while everything has changed. The week after the wedding passed in fragments. I replayed that night over and over, not with regret exactly, but with a strange sense of disbelief, like I'd stepped out of a role I'd been playing for decades and was still waiting for someone to tell me I'd missed my cue. Daniel didn't call. That hurt more than any angry message would have. I told myself he needed time. I told myself Lydia was probably furious. I told myself that I'd embarrassed him, and that embarrassment takes longer to heal than anger. Still, every morning I checked my phone before I made coffee, and every morning there was nothing. On the fourth date, I went to the grocery store. I remember that detail because it was the first place I ran into someone who'd been at the wedding. It was Linda from Daniel's childhood baseball team. Her hair was grayer now, pulled back too tight, but her eyes widened the second she saw me. "Maggie," she said, grabbing my arm like she might lose me if she didn't. "I've been meaning to call you." I smiled politely. "You didn't." She flushed. I didn't know what to say. We stood there between the cereal and the canned soup, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "You said what needed to be said," she blurted. "I just want you to know that." I nodded. "Thank you." "And," she added, lowering her voice, "you weren't wrong." That sentence followed me home. Over the next few days, similar moments kept happening. A former neighbor dropped off a casserole just because. A cousin messaged me privately to say she'd always felt uncomfortable with how things had shifted but hadn't known how to speak up. Even Lydia's aunt, whom I'd only met twice, sent me a long email apologizing for how things may have looked. May have looked. I didn't respond. The truth was, none of this made me feel vindicated. It made me feel exposed, like I'd peeled back something private, and now everyone had an opinion about it. What I wanted, what I needed, was to hear from my son. The call finally came late one evening, just as I was settling into bed. His name lit up my screen, and my heart did that awful leap, the one that feels hopeful and dangerous at the same time. I answered on the second ring. Danny, I said. There was a long pause. Mom, he said finally. His voice sounded tired, older. We need to talk. I figured, I said gently. Another pause. Lydia's parents are furious, he said. They think you. I know what they think, I interrupted. What do you think? Silence again, longer this time. I think, he said slowly, that you blindsided us. I closed my eyes. I didn't plan to speak, I said. I reacted to what was happening in front of me. You could have waited, he said. You could have talked to me privately. I sat up in bed. I've been waiting, Daniel. That's not fair, he snapped, and there it was, anger at last. You made it about you. I felt something tighten in my chest. I made it about the truth, I said. There's a difference. He exhaled sharply. You embarrassed Lydia. I didn't mention her name once, I said. You didn't have to. I let that sink in. So, I asked quietly, is that what this is about? Appearances? He didn't answer right away. Mom, he said finally, softer now, things are complicated. I laughed once, not humor, recognition. They always are, I said. That's not an excuse to disappear. He sighed. Lydia feels like you don't like her. I don't dislike her, I said honestly, but I don't feel welcome either. She's tried, he said quickly. So have I replied. Another silence. This one felt heavy with things neither of us wanted to name. We need some space, he said at last. There it was, the sentence that landed harder than any insult. How much? I asked. I don't know, he said. Right now, some. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. 68 years old, and somehow still being told to wait my turn. Something in me hardened then, not into bitterness, into resolve. If they wanted distance, I would give it to them. But distance works both ways. A month passed, then 2. I stopped reaching out. I went back to things I'd put aside. I joined a local writing group. I started volunteering at the community center. I spent afternoons walking instead of waiting. And then, because life has a sense of timing that borders on cruel, I got a call from a lawyer. He introduced himself politely, professionally, asked if I was Margaret Callahan. Yes, I said, already uneasy. I'm calling regarding your late mother's estate, he said. I felt a flicker of surprise. My mother had passed years ago. The estate had been settled, or so I thought. There appears to have been an oversight, he continued, a trust that was never activated. My pulse quickened. A trust? I repeated. Yes, he said, designated to pass to you upon certain conditions. What conditions? I asked. There was a brief pause. Full legal independence from any spouse or dependent children. I swallowed. And, I asked. It appears, he said, those conditions were met recently. I thought of the folding chair, of the speech, of the silence, of the space. I'd like to meet, I said. When I hung up, I sat very still. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. Because in that moment, I realized something that sent a chill through me. The story wasn't over. It was just changing narrators. I didn't tell Daniel about the trust. Not at first. I didn't tell anyone, actually. I drove to the lawyer's office alone on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where the sky looks undecided. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my mind cycling through every possible outcome, mistake, misunderstanding, disappointment. Hope felt dangerous. The lawyer's office was quiet, tasteful in that expensive but neutral way. Dark wood, framed certificates, a faint smell of coffee that had been sitting too long. He offered me a seat, a real one, upholstered, solid. I almost laughed at that. He explained it carefully. My mother, practical to the end, had set up a trust decades ago. money from the sale of land her family once owned, invested slowly, quietly. She'd worried about dependence, about control, about history repeating itself. So she'd added conditions. At the time, I'd been married, then divorced, then raising a child. The trust stayed dormant. Until now. The number he slid across the desk toward me didn't look real. Too many zeros, enough to erase old fears and create new ones. "This is yours," he said. "No stipulations now. No oversight." I nodded slowly. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I thought about my mother, how she'd watched my life unfold, how she'd worried in her own quiet way. I wondered if she'd known this moment would come, or if she'd just prepared in case it did. The first thing I did with the money wasn't dramatic. I paid off my mortgage. The second thing I did was change my will. The third thing I did was wait. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel still didn't call. But the world shifted anyway. People change how they speak to you when they sense you no longer need them. I stood straighter. I slept better. I stopped second-guessing my own memories. And then, one afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door. No call, no warning. I opened it, and there he was, hands in his pockets, older again somehow, thinner, tired. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stepped aside without a word and let him in. He looked around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe like he was realizing what he'd assumed would always be there. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd paid bills late at night, where I'd swallowed words for years. "I heard about the trust," he said finally. I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I didn't tell Lydia." He flushed. "Her mother knows the lawyer." There it was, the web. "I'm not here for money," he said quickly. Too quickly. "I didn't say you were," I replied. He sighed. "Things have been hard." I waited. "We're under a lot of pressure," he continued. "Expectations, plans." I nodded. "That happens when you build a life on appearances." He winced. "I didn't realize how much I was asking you to give up," he said quietly. "How much I was letting happen." I studied his face. The boy I loved was still there, but so was the man he'd become, and I understood, finally, that loving him didn't mean excusing everything. "I'm not angry, Daniel," I said, "but I am done disappearing." He swallowed. "Lydia wants to make things right." I didn't respond. "She wants to apologize," he added. "That's her choice," I said, just like it was her choice to freeze me out. He looked down. "I should have stood up for you." "Yes," I said simply. That silence felt different from the others. Honest, uncomfortable, necessary. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. I stood up and began clearing the table, not because it needed clearing, but because movement helped. "Neither do I," said. "But I know this. My life doesn't pause anymore while you decide where I fit." He nodded slowly. When he left, he hugged me longer than he had in years. Things didn't magically fix themselves after that. Lydia and I are polite now. Careful. The folding chair was never mentioned again, but it didn't need to be. I moved closer to the community center. I travel. I write. I speak when something matters. And sometimes, this part still surprises me, I'm invited to sit at the front. Here's what I've learned at 68 years old. Being quiet doesn't keep the peace. It just keeps the truth lonely. They gave me a folding chair because they thought I'd accept it. I gave a speech because I finally understood I didn't have to. And I've never sat the same way since.